Hi, this is Andrew back with another short video on language learning and linguistics. This time it's the turn of CLIL. I've been talking about task-based learning in the past couple of videos, so I thought CLIL would dovetail nicely into this. So content and language integrated learning, what is it? How can I do it? Well, what we're going to look at today is some of the contents here. We've got CLIL, specifically for primary and secondary school teachers. We're going to look at what CLIL is, what are the challenges for CLIL teachers, how we can plan CLIL classes, how we can assess CLIL, and then, well, questions, you can type them below as usual. Okay, so what is CLIL? Well, it stands for Content and Language Integrated Learning and refers to teaching subjects such as science, history, and geography to students using a foreign language. So content is placed first in CLIL as subject content determines language input. And what differentiates CLIL is the planned integration of contextualized content, cognition, communication and culture into teaching and learning practices. This was from Coyle and Hood and Marsh in a book 2010 published by Cambridge University Press called CLIL. So let's take these fairly wordy descriptions and break them down a little bit and look into a little more detail about what CLIL actually is. So, what is CLIL? Why does it exist? What are the bases? Well, got a nice quote from Halliday in 1975 here, which says, "People do not learn languages and use them, but learn languages by using them." So this is the idea of CLIL, that people are learning English or French or Spanish by using it, not by studying grammar paradigms, vocabulary lists, and so on. They're actually using the language. The next one from Marsh, again in 2000, says, "Just as an infant can have extraordinary powers of communication with only a few words, so our ability to communicate in a language can be reasonably successful even if our grammar is faulty, knowledge of words is weak, or pronunciation poor. We should all challenge the idea of waiting until I think I'm good enough in the language to use the language. Rather, we should use the language as a tool for communication and learning from as early a point as possible." So the idea here is that regardless of your level of English or the level your students have, they can take advantage of CLIL to communicate. That's what the language is for. That's why we learn languages, to communicate. So let's get the students communicating right from the beginning. And then Van den Krijn in 2006 describes CLIL as a meaning-focused learning method. The aim is learning subject matter together with learning a language. So we're using the language as a vehicle, much like in task-based learning, where the language is a vehicle to learn about something else. So why would you use CLIL? Well, here are some ideas I came up with. The first one is, can you learn to play football or play the piano without kicking a ball or touching the keys? No. So how do you expect to learn a language without actually using it? In CLIL, we provide a situation in which the attention of the child is on a form of learning activity which is not the language itself. So the idea is it's more interesting. It's not grammar paradigms. It's not long lists of vocabulary. It's not boring speaking in pairs work. It's using the language to learn about something else. CLIL can also be very successful in enhancing the learning of languages and subjects and developing in the youngsters a positive can-do attitude towards themselves as language learners, because they can get immediate results. They're using the language to communicate. They can speak English, for example. Also, there's the question of authenticity. The student is the speaker. The topics are related to their needs, everyday life and interest. It gets them contact with target language users and the use of authentic materials. So the CLIL is based on what the students are doing, topics related to their life, their interests. The language is related to their needs. So this again dovetails into the can-do attitude, because we're using authentic materials. We're not using some example from a textbook. For example, celebrations. Let's talk about snowmen in southern Spain. Well, that's remote because the majority of children in southern Spain aren't going to build a snowman, so why do they need to learn about snowmen at Christmas? So we can make it more authentic with CLIL. Also, active learning. Students get to talk more. They get help to rephrase the outcomes. They can assess their progress. They can cooperate. They can discuss. The teacher's there as a guide and provider to clarify any linguistic needs or any doubts, relating to the topic. So given that, CLIL has some clear benefits. We can introduce a wider cultural context. It can prepare students for internationalization, to go to different countries, to meet people from other cultures. It can also enhance the school's profiles, particularly in bilingual education, by making the students speak and communicate more effectively. It can improve the overall and specific language competence. Again, the language is being used, so it's getting learned more effectively. It can prepare for future studies and or working life. If you see my other video on the acronyms in English teaching, you'll see things like English for academic purposes, English for specific purposes, English for jobs and professions. CLIL can help prepare for this. It can also develop multilingual interests and attitudes and diversify methods of teaching and learning. It can make the class more fun and more informative for both the teacher and the students. And also using CLIL can increase learner motivation from the results I've talked about before. So we have the 4C approach to CLIL, which is the integration. We use the communication, the culture, the content, and the cognition. That's the structure of CLIL. The communication is divided into two parts, BICS and CALP. So BICS stands for Basic Interpersonal Communication Skills, and this is conversational, social, everyday language. Fluency in this, if done correctly, takes 1 to 3 years. So when I said about enhancing the reputation of a school, that's a clear example of this. But the BICS also involves a silent period. This is where the students will just sit and assimilate all the information they're being given, but they won't talk. But believe me, once they do start to talk, they really go for it. They're motoring with their language. And it can often be used in pair work or task-based learning too. The other side of the language section is CALP, which stands for Cognitive Academic Language Proficiency. Wow. So this is subject-specific language. This is the language they get from the school, from the textbook, from the academic language. Perhaps it could be vocabulary related to energy consumption or energy production. So they get to talk about things like hydroelectric power stations, turbines, and vocabulary like this, which is really quite academic. But also this can help the learners to develop the subject literacy and linguistic skills within that specific subject. So there are two clear sides to the CLIL framework as far as the linguistic content goes. So example of BICS. BICS is the nice, happy, communicative language. It's the kind of stuff you'd hear in a playground. Things like, hi, good morning. Can you take out your books? I think that's a good idea. Juan isn't here today because he's ill. Just a moment, I didn't hear that. Could you repeat that, please? So we've got negotiation of meaning here. Pass me the black pen, please. Has anyone seen my notebooks? This is kind of functional, everyday language, which, yeah, you can use it in the playground, but this is a skill that can be transferred to other environments, and it gives the kids this can-do sense of being able to speak, communicate, negotiate meaning, and interact in an additional or second language. The CALP, on the other hand, well, this is language you're never really going to hear in the playground. Let's take a word like whereas. It's kind of down the weak end of the CALP scale because you could use the word but when you get to sort of longer words like photosynthesis, well, these are words they're going to have to remember and learn as if it were a traditional sort of language class. This is vocabulary that has to be assimilated. The CALP also talks about the abstract subject content, and it can lead to understanding a range of subject-specific text. So it's the kind of nitty-gritty jargon or the technical language that the students are learning about whilst using BICS. So the cognition framework is this, which is, again, I've done a video on Bloom's taxonomy of learning. So rather than delving deeply into that here, I would recommend that you hop across and watch the video on Bloom, which will give you a better understanding of this. And the Bloom wheel as well, which gives us the 6 areas and some really good verbs we can use in lesson planning. The idea with this being on the outer ring, we've got some sorts of activities, like if we look at synthesis, we can use things like poems, books, reports, stories, songs, sets of rules, principles, standards, games, inventions, and so on. But the lesson planning would combine one of the verbs from the middle wheel, which would be combine, compose, design, generate, invent, plan, formulate, originate, devise, revise, hypothesize. So you can see the idea here is to move up to the higher level thinking skills. And again, this is better explained in my video on Bloom's taxonomy of learning. So the 4C, interrelationships between content and language, we can see on the left, the sort of easier part. This is about water. So part 1, learn what water is and how water changes state. And this can be done with acquiring new key vocabulary, which is on the right, or grouping words into semantic families, like we've got river, sea, lake, pond, spring, fall, puddle, lake, ocean, and so on. Back to the left, we've got know what the water cycle, both urban and natural, consists of. And on the right, we've got the elements involved in the water cycle. Again, to the left, understand and explain how water is recycled throughout the natural water cycle to learn about contamination. And we've got also on the left, relate the change of states to the different levels of the water cycle. So on the right, that both link to the verbs and the states, liquid, solid, vapor, gas. So we're connecting the left to the right here. Again, on the left, define the most important processes in the water cycle. We can look at evaporation, condensation, precipitation, and collection, for example. 6 is the characteristics of water. 7, the uses of water. So on the right, that would then probably link to the present simple, present continuous to describe, define and explain the processes involved in the water cycle, and possibly using the zero conditional sentences for cause and effect processes. So we can map the grammar that we want to encourage the students to use within the CLIL framework, which is something that we don't really do in task-based learning. So that's one difference between CLIL and task-based learning. It's can be a little bit more prescriptive. Also, continue the framework culture. So we've got on the left again the impact of climate change. So this leads to knowledge and understanding of different cultures beyond the classroom. Different business cultures in Asia, different festivals and traditions on the left. So we can look at projects and exchanges with schools in other countries. And there are a number of Facebook groups, for example, that you can go on to find teachers from other countries who've got students of a similar age studying a similar thing, and they'd like to share and interchange ideas. And this also helps foster a classroom culture of cooperation and respect for others. So evidence from research. Well, the research today says that it takes 5 to 7 years for students in a quality bilingual program to become academically proficient in English. CLIL is connected more to acquisition, not language teaching as such. That's why we get confusion between CLIL and task-based learning. I've tried to dispel that confusion in this video. But acquisition is cyclical, it's not a linear process. Learners acquire best when they create, discover, and construct their own meanings. They learn by doing. And the language is a means, not an end. When the learners are interested in the topic, they'll be more motivated to acquire language to communicate. Then, fluency. We have perceived accuracy, and errors are a natural part of language learning. We don't get hung up about making mistakes, but it's perfectly natural. Language acquisition, if we even go down to morpheme acquisition or the order of acquisition, people acquire languages in a fairly set, structured way. If we look at somebody who's learning Spanish, for example, where there are 2 verbs to be, ser and estar, people normally use ser for everything to begin with, For an example, I am from Scotland, soy de Scotia, that's fine, but I am happy, soy contento. People would say that, but really it would be estoy contento. So that you can see that languages are a natural part of building this acquisition to building fluency. Also, learners develop fluency in English by using English to communicate for a variety of purposes. They're using the language to get better and better at it. And also with this, reading is essential for developing academic English skills. And quite often in CLIL, there are good texts to read that are interesting, they're at the level the students need, and this helps develop their academic English skills. So a CLIL curriculum, well, there isn't really such a thing, but, or syllabus anyway. How it works, all or some of the subjects are taught through a foreign or second language. For example, my daughter goes to school in Spain. She gets art in English, music in English. So this is the idea. Or in a secondary school, they might get biology in English. What they won't get is French in English, because something like that would be kind of ridiculous. But the whole curriculum is based on the 4 C's we mentioned before: the content, communication, cognition, and culture. More content is taught as language competence increases. So generally the texts get longer, they get more complicated as the competence increases or as the level the students have goes up. There's no formal syllabus, okay? We can use English in a holistic way, similar to how it's applied in task-based learning. And generally, CLIL should start in primary school. Some schools try to begin this at an infant's level, but the cognitive maturity is not there. It can be difficult for infants to do this, but primary school is generally a good age to start this. In the framework itself, in a CLIL lesson, all 4 language skills should be combined. So we've got listening. It's a normal input activity, vital for language learning. Listening can input to expose the students to more language. It can also help with the pronunciation, and it can help with their speaking because it's sharpening the listening skill. Reading, using meaningful, relevant, interesting material at the correct level for the students, is a huge, major, important source of input. I can't underline how important reading is. It's fundamental here. Speaking focuses on fluency. Accuracy in CLIL is seen as subordinate. So the idea is that the students are speaking fluently. They don't need to be 100% accurate. It's not a Cambridge Advanced English exam. It's a CLIL class. Fluency is more important. And writing. This is taken as a series of lexical activities through which grammar is recycled. So again, we're constantly recycling the grammar. We can recycle the vocabulary, and that helps it kind of stick in the students' minds. Also, CLIL lessons have the following characteristics. We integrate language and skills and receptive and productive skills. Okay? Lessons are often based on reading or listening texts or passages. So there's the input to generate the output. The language focus in a lesson does not consider structural grading. Also, we're not considering formal structural grading here. The language in a CLIL class is functional and dictated by the context of the subject. Language is approached lexically rather than grammatically, and learner styles are taken into account in different task types. So the idea here is that we're not using traditional formal testing, which may be something that could be difficult to persuade your school to adopt, but given the benefits of the accelerated use of the language, I think the benefits far outweigh the problems of taking away formal testing. So the idea here with CLIL, we've got an interactive text. So you can see that some of the words here are highlighted. These may be new words, but they can form the basis for a good discussion after reading the text, like this. We can talk about the history of jeans, people, brands, places. We've got Levi's and Wranglers, for example. Materials that they may be made of, styles, different colours. So we can explore the text in a discussion here to get a lot of information, a sort of a mind map from the students about their understanding, in this case, of genes. So the mind mapping is the communicative part here, and it's helping the students express what they've understood and bring in their own ideas to the party as well. Some examples of prompts we might use to prompt the students in this mind mapping exercise. Again, we have the vocabulary on the right. We have some nice little phrases on the left that can be used when we're talking about this. So we can see what we're pointing the students towards, either learning or using in this particular activity. So CLIL teachers, well, what they can be is subject teachers who can also teach a language, or language teachers who can teach content. They need to be competent in the target language. Most CLIL resource books, teachers' books, and the academic side publications in academia recommend that the teacher has at least a C1 level in the target language. And additionally, the teacher should be properly trained, because CLIL is a different way of teaching to traditional language teaching, as we've seen. So what a good CLIL teacher is good at, identifying the core language of a subject, such as the slides we looked at with the genes activity, working with texts and words, designing tasks and projects, and also using technology, because we want this interaction between different cultures, different schools in different countries, to have this interaction over technology, whether it's Skype, Google Hangouts, through Moodle, or a different web-based platform to get people talking. So we can also start to integrate 21st century skills here into the modern CLIL classroom. There are some issues with CLIL, however. Quite often, the language teachers don't like having subject teachers come in to teach CLIL. It can be done together with a language teacher and a subject teacher. But again, this is purely dependent on the level of the teacher's English in this case, and their ability to teach in English. Most current CLIL programs are experimental, because there's no sort of definite set foundation of a curriculum for CLIL. Even if you buy some of the leading textbooks in this field, the way they're structured, it's still reasonably experimental. There's no researched evidence on the structure for CLIL yet. It's coming together. CLIL is based on language acquisition, not language teaching. So it's learning implicitly, not explicitly. I've got a video coming on this too. And there's generally a lack of CLIL teacher training. There aren't very many seminars about CLIL on how to do it. So I might do something on this on the internet soon. It can also cause a reduction of comprehension according to language competence. This is where people can find it difficult to communicate. They might find that the text is beyond their reach, for example. So again, this is where teacher training comes in. And it's unnatural, difficult to teach some languages using CLIL. Things like art, music in primary lend themselves very well. Sciences in secondary. But you'd never teach French using English, for example. Philosophy might be very difficult to teach using CLIL. So you need to find the right subject in which to do this. But the benefits, well, in many cases, CLIL can increase your students' motivation to learn what you're teaching them. This can enable them to progress more quickly and solidly than they would with deliberately separated traditional subjects, i.e. teaching English in a traditional way. Basically the textbook way. Make sure that the content-specific subject is a primary objective and the linguistic goals are secondary. You don't want this in secondary school, for example, the students who are studying biology and English to be behind in the subject matter by comparison to their peers who may be learning biology and Spanish. So the primary objective must be the content-specific subject matter. The linguistic goals are secondary, really. They're there to learn something else, not necessarily the language. That's a byproduct. And this also, by doing this, provides consistency and sturdy scaffolding on which to build the linguistic progress. And because CLIL is so strongly associated with both a content area and a foreign language, it's naturally imbued with cultural and societal significance. Also, even in CLIL lessons, it will become apparent that some skills and knowledge are applicable to a wide range in a variety of languages. So these are transferable skills, transferable language, transferable knowledge that can be used elsewhere. Also, by challenging your students with CLIL, you'll be able to help them build confidence in their abilities. The best part of this is that their confidence won't be inflated. The legitimate cognitive and academic skills encouraged by CLIL are widely recognised and valued. So that's the introduction to CLIL, and thank you very much. Goodbye.